but the tone was set right from the outset with a series of questions about immigration where the Vice President of the United States wasn't really given the opportunity to respond. Here's how that played out.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
Looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was the opening exchange, Mika. It went on like that for nearly 30 minutes. It goes without saying that Donald Trump would not be given the same treatments, talked over, not allowed to finish those questions. It doesn't mean the topics weren't fair. There was a lot in there that viewers wanted to hear from Kamala Harris. Why do you have different positions now than you did in 2019? How are you going to fix the immigration crisis? All fair questions, but Donald Trump obviously would never be treated that way on Fox News.
No, not by, I mean, I've watched Brett Breyer for years. That's just, that was different. I think another great place to focus would be with the enemy from within comments that President Trump made. You see, that's the exact phrase Trump used a number of times in recent days, referring to his political adversaries and members of the press even, and the retribution he would take against them. It's decidedly un-American. It's a big story. And it's the critical backdrop to this moment in which Vice President Kamala Harris sat down for an interview with Fox News. It was supposed to give viewers an opportunity to actually hear her plans as president. Instead, as you saw, it almost immediately devolved into an embarrassing bad faith effort by a once respected host to play to an audience of one. The host's constant, rude interruptions were designed to distract from the issues and facts that Trump and his acolytes try and twist and distort every day. And on Fox News, they try and avoid. And they couldn't. When Kamala Harris realized the host was not going to let her speak, the only way the vice president could give Fox viewers an opportunity to hear what she had to say was to talk back over him. Was he making sure that happened? I personally think absolutely. Did she do well in this environment? Of course. She was great. She's a former prosecutor, attorney general, senator, current vice president. She's fine with a situation like that and even flourishes. Yet there were times she was shaky on answers about immigration. He kept coming after her. But the questions sounded like they came from a Trump campaign ad. In fact, they played a Trump campaign ad in the interview. The host almost seemed obsessed with transgender surgeries. The vice president kept trying to tell him she will follow the law. That was the answer. All the while, the vice president found her opportunities to make the case against Donald Trump.
Over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president, one, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning and engaging in personal grievances and it being about him instead of the American people. People are tired of that.
If that's the case, why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%? Are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people.
That's the part they don't want you to hear. How Fox News conducted itself with the Harris interview is just part of the story. What was equally dismaying was another piece of the phony playbook that came earlier in the day, in the form of a fluffy town hall, if you call it that, with Donald Trump and a hand-picked audience that appeared to have been all MAGA, many thanking him for gracing them with his presence. As for the content, well, Trump lied to the audience about the issue of abortion, claiming it'll just work itself out, it'll be okay. You're good.
Now it's where everybody has wanted it for years, and now it's working its way out in the states. Nobody wanted it to be in the federal government. 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, they started talking about weeks and this and that. But what they wanted is they wanted it back in the states for a vote of the people, and that's where we have it. And the states are now voting for it. And honestly, some of them are going much more liberal, like in Ohio. I would have thought it might
some of them
be a
are
little
not
bit different, and some of them are not. But it's going to be redone. It's going to be redone. You end up with a vote of the people. And some of them, I agree, they're too tough, and those are going to be redone because already there's a movement in those states. I know exactly what you're talking about, to redo it. It's back in the states where they can have the vote of the people. It's exactly where they want to be. Remember this issue has torn this country apart for 52 years. So we got it back in the states. We have a vote of the people, and it's working its way through the system. And ultimately, it's going to be the right thing.
I want to share with you Senators Warnock and Ossoff, Mayor Bottoms and Atlanta Mayor Bottoms, and Amba Thurman's family have come out on a press call, and they're doing what's called a pre-buttal 2-hour town hall right now.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and I want to
get better ratings, I promise.
Yeah. Okay. So is he changing his position about abortion after overturning Roe and saying women should be punished for, and by the way, joking about a woman who died arguably because of a severe abortion ban allowed to be in place because of Donald Trump? Classy. But it'll all work out, right? Yeah. He also said, by the way, this was interesting, that he's the father of IVF, moments before admitting he only learned about the issue this year.
Oh, I want to talk about IVF. I'm the father.
You don't hear that every day.
I'm the father of IVF, so I want to hear this question. I got a call from Katie Britt, a young, just a fantastically attractive person from Alabama. She's a senator. And she called me up like emergency, because an Alabama judge had ruled that the IVF clinics were illegal and they have to be closed down. A judge. And I said, explain IVF very quickly. And within about 2 minutes, I understood it. I said, no, we're totally in favor of IVF. I came out with a statement within an hour, a really powerful statement with some experts, really powerful. And we went totally in favor. The Republican Party, the whole party, Alabama legislature, a day later overturned, meaning approved it, overturned, the judge essentially approved it. And we really are the party for IVF. We want fertilization, and it's all the way. And the Democrats tried to attack us on it, and we're out there on IVF even more than them. So we're totally in favor of it.
When he talked about illegal immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, continuing his cruelty toward the legal Haitians who he terrorized there, the host gently reminded him, ever so lightly, that they were actually legal.
Springfield, Ohio, they have 50,000, 52,000 people. No problems, no real crime, a beautiful community. They just dropped 30,000 illegal aliens in Springfield, Ohio, and it's become a different place. We're going to destroy our country. Our country is going...
Actually,
it's horrible.
You know, there's more to that story. They are here legally. Yeah. And there are programs that the current administration has put into place to do those flights. So we recently learned, we didn't have any number to compare it to, so all of a sudden we knew 1.5 million people had come in through those flights. And we know the numbers have lessened at the border because of what they're doing, partially right. Well, I mean, the timing of it is interesting. Right? But the numbers get made up by the people that we can't see in the flights. And all of it has a burden on the economy.
Okay, so legal, illegal, whatever, you know. But then you go to the evening, the polar opposite. We witnessed a man who spent his life as a down-the-middle journalist, seeming to throw it all away for his audience of one, interrupting the vice president awkwardly and unnecessarily, ignoring many issues that define this campaign, including a woman's right to health care freedom. Most disturbing was when he showed a misleading clip about Donald Trump responding to a question about his enemy from within comments.
He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you...
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
She got it in there. You see, the concern is that Trump has clearly indicated he intends to use the military to go after his adversaries in this country. And in his Fox-friendly town hall, Trump doubled down on that, this time actually naming names. But that's not the clip they showed Kamala Harris. And the vice president called out Fox News on Fox News. Here's the full clip they should have shown.
I wasn't unhinged. You know what they are? They're a party of sound bites. Somebody asked me, can they be brought together? You know, I never thought, really, I wasn't thinking like they could, because they're very, very different. And it is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. It took 2 years to solve the problem. Absolutely nothing was done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. They're dangerous for our country. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult are, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick. and they're so evil. If they would spend their time trying to make America great again, it would be so easy to make this country great. But when I heard about that, they were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
All right.
They're the threat to democracy.
It's simply another sign of what appears to be a threat of fascism. Yes, we need to say that word. As for Fox, there was nothing fair and balanced about what we saw play out yesterday over their airwaves.